All right, Seth, the NBA draft Wednesday night. Everybody knows Cooper Flagg is going number one, but what else are you looking for in the NBA draft? We have those two Rutgers guys, Ace Bailey, and Dylan Harper at the top of the boards. What do you think is going to happen? What are you hearing?
Well, Ace Bailey is like a super interesting case right now. Kind of started with him at the combine where he measured 6'7.5", and he was listed as 6'10" at Rutgers. Now we're used to seeing some variance in that. My partner Clark Kellogg calls it program height when he listed a guy. That's just program height. So, but that was a little bit bigger than usual. And it's fascinating that these NBA scouts can watch a guy play in person so much, and yet they measure small at the combine, and somehow they're surprised by that. Like, you'd think that they would be able to figure that out. Same thing happened, by the way, to Jace Richardson at Michigan State, who measured close to 6 feet tall, as a guy who's projected as a two guard at the next level. Ace Bailey, the way he conducted his media session at the combine, it was just a little off. It was just, he's a young kid. He's certainly immature. He's a little goofy, like a lot of young kids are. I'm all for confidence. I think that's a great quality, and they say youthful ignorance is bliss. But let's be honest. I mean, Rutgers had 2 lottery picks, potentially top 5 picks on the team, and they didn't make the NCAA tournament. So you might want to come in with a little bit more humility. And then he has been canceling workouts or not holding workouts. Now, he was supposed to have a workout with the Philadelphia 76ers, canceled it. You hear things like, he and his camp are trying to charge money for interviews. His agent wants to be paid to be interviewed. Just a lot of not great chatter around him. So it's kind of shades of Shadur Sanders. Now, he's not going to fall nearly as far. I don't see him getting past maybe 6 or 7. But for a guy who, back in November and December, you heard about him as maybe being the number 1 pick. I was surprised in my conversations with NBA scouts, kind of how maybe not down on him, but how unsure they were about him. And I'll tell you that, throughout the course of the season, I never heard one negative vibe on him coming out of Rutgers, that he was an attitude problem, none of that. So I think this is a lot more immaturity, but it might also be a reflection of who's in his camp and who's in his ear at this stage of the process. So I think that's going to be kind of the guessing game. I'll also note, BJ, that the list came out for who was invited to the green room for the draft. 24 names are on that list, and there are only 30 picks. So you might think that the people who put together that invite list have, this great inside information, but, they're getting lied to just like I'm getting lied to. So if you're going to invite 24 players into the green room, there's a pretty good chance that one or probably more of them are actually not going to get drafted. I don't know how other people feel about it. Maybe I'm older now, a little bit soft, but I always feel terrible in that situation for the young man. This is supposed to be, the great night of his life, the culmination of all that hard work and all that dreaming, and it just ends up being a disaster. So I hope I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, you mentioned Bailey might slide a little bit. What are you hearing for a guy or two that is shooting up the draft boards?
Well, I think on the flip side, Trey Johnson of Texas has really solidified himself as a top 4 pick, in my view. I think it's a close call between him and VJ Edgecombe. I think Edgecombe has the edge in terms of athleticism. I think Trey Johnson is a little bit more skill ready, a little bit more mature. Kavan Malawach, the big guy from Duke, I've been a little bit surprised to see this reporting, him climbing up, to be picked as early as, 3rd or 4th. I don't think that's going to happen, but he's been projected kind of in that way. We think about sort of the spread the floor, 3-point shot analytics type of game, but I think there's that sense that you still need size, right? I mean, Zach Edey was picked a lot higher last year than people expected. Donovan Clingan from UConn was picked real high. So I could see Malawach really benefiting from that. And then another guy who since the end of the season really helped himself is Yegor Demon from BYU. Questions about his strength and his 3-point shot. and the work that he's put in since the end of the season has addressed those two things. And then the guy that I really like is Walter Clayton Jr. from Florida. I think he's this year's Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson was right there for everybody to see what he was able to do, not just in terms of points, rebounds, assists, scoring, all that stuff, but just being a stone cold winner. Jalen Brunson was a winner in college. Walter Clayton's a winner in college, and I think he's going to prove that and probably get picked too low, just like Brunson was.
How are, from scouts that you've been talking to, how are they evaluating players in this NIL era that have been to multiple schools? And yes, they have what's in front of them, Clayton Jr. being a great example of that, leading Florida to the national championship. But when guys that have been to 2-3 different schools, how has that evaluation process changed now?
Yeah, I don't think it bothers anybody. It used to be a red flag. Well, why does he move around so much? And maybe we need to dig into that. But nowadays, everybody does it. Look at Nick Clifford. He went from Colorado to Colorado State and developed his game. Look at Grant Nelson. He went from North Dakota State to Alabama, played his way into the NBA. I don't know if he's a first-round pick. It is so common now to see guys moving to multiple schools. And I actually think the NIL piece of it works to their advantage, because it's not about he didn't want to fight through adversity. He's got character issues, flunked the drug test, I heard, stuff like that. It's, he got paid more money and it makes more sense to people. So when you're talking about, 2,000 plus college players transferring every year, now the vast majority of those, by the way, are not NBA players, because first of all, you get a lot of freshmen still in the top of the first round, and then also like the people who transfer, especially from high major programs, tend to be the leading scorers and the best players, and the guys have the best chance to be a pro. So I think people have just gotten used to it, and it all depends on how good you are at this point, much more than how many schools have you played for.
Speaking of really good, Cooper Flagg, the unanimous universal #1 pick, had a terrific year at Duke, leading the Blue Devils to the Final Four. How good can he be at the next level?
Well, he's a generational talent. I mean, reclassified in high school, turned 18 at the end of December, so he might be the youngest player in the draft. And, with all the hype and all the attention, and not just like from the media, but other teams, he may have actually exceeded expectations. I mean, he was very even-keeled in his temperament, yet super competitive, a great teammate, a great team player. Unlike Bailey and Harper, and then to be fair, of course, he had a much, much better supporting cast. I mean, it's not even close, but was able to accrue some big-time statistics while still helping his team win. So, there's really not much you can poke holes in his game. People might want to raise, outside shooting, but it really got better substantially throughout the course of the season. His body's going to get better, and he's really, I think, lucked out in that he's going to Dallas. I mean, he's going to be the third #1 overall pick on that team, along with Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving. So it's not like he's going to have to go in from day one and carry the load. I mean, he's going to be able to find his way. As a great basketball philosopher once said, the ceiling is the roof with Cooper Flagg. I mean, he's just going to get his work ethic, his ability to improve, get better and better and better. And again, 18 years old. I mean, he is just getting started. So when you think about, he's 23, 24, he's still pretty young by pro athlete standards, but if he's 23, he'll be in his 5th, 6th year in the league. So Mavericks really lucked out and getting it. He just checks every box, including the character piece, which doesn't always come with all the other stuff.
Yeah, he's. I saw him play live several times this year, and he's the type of guy that can affect a game without ever scoring. I remember watching him in Newark in the East Regional, and by anybody's standard, he had a average first half, but he affected the game in so many ways and was not worried about how many points he scored. Duke was up, so that's all that mattered. So he just really got a unique feel for the game.
Yeah, and that's like you said, that's just a really unique quality. And then on the defensive end, he's an outstanding defender. Whenever I talk to Scott, we always focus on the offense so much with all these players for good reason. But the most important thing that you can bring, especially if you're a bigger player like a Cooper Flagg, is defensive versatility. So it's very rare to have a guy who is as good of a rim protector as he is, as good of a rebounder as he is, and still be able to switch out on smaller guards and keep them in front. By the way, Kaman Malawach, who I mentioned earlier, is incredible at that. There were plenty of times when he got switched out onto a smaller defender, and at 7'1" was able to get down in his stance and keep the guy in front of him. So yeah, I mean, Cooper Flagg is just a winner. That's the bottom line. He's a great individual player, and he's a winner. He's got great competitive attitude. Without bringing in a lot of the negative. There's literally nothing bad that you can say about Cooper Flagg, other than, of course, that he went to Duke.
Well, I mean, and once again, they're going to have 4 guys that are drafted, probably 3 first-rounders, and Tyrese Proctor probably in the second round.
Yeah, and coming out of that program, and that's why they were in the Final Four and up 14 on Houston midway through the second half before it all collapsed.
Hey everyone, what's up? It's Greg Olson. I just wrote the very first issue of the Youth Inc. newsletter, and I wrote it for you. Whether you're a parent, a coach, an athlete, this newsletter is here to inform, inspire, and entertain anyone who cares about youth sports. Go to youth.inc/newsletter and sign up today. It's free, it's for our community, and we are just getting started. We all want youth sports to be better. Join the movement.
Shifting a little bit on the NIL landscape, there was this landmark court case that was with this $2.8 billion settlement, but really most importantly, this whole idea of revenue sharing with the players. How do you think this is going to affect college basketball in the immediate and kind of trickle down into recruiting and then into the grassroots ranks?
Well, the bottom line for college basketball is the fact that college athletes can now be compensated has been a huge boon for college basketball. I want to say 107, 108 undergraduates put their name in the NBA draft, which is down from over 300 just a couple of years ago. The ability to come back to school and be able, JT Toppin is a great example. He'll be a first-team All-America next year at Texas Tech, was almost certainly going to be a first-round pick. He went back to Texas Tech to make about $4 million if the reports are true. So it's been really, really good. I wrote a story recently at Hoops HQ about how this new system and these new salary caps and this new enforcement setup over the NIL space is going to drastically, in theory, reduce player compensation. You talk about JT Toppin making $4 million. A typical SEC payroll for an entire team next year is going to be under $4 million. And they're going to enforce the NIL space to make it a true name, image, and likeness deal. In other words, it's not just wealthy billionaire oil booster at Texas Tech cutting a check to either a Toppin or Kennedy, the softball pitcher, for $1 million. It's got to be a true name, image, and likeness deal. And Deloitte is the accounting firm that's going to oversee this, and they're bringing in a whole new enforcement setup. This is not the quote-unquote NCAA. Again, it's a big if, but the difference is that this is not the bumbling, stumbling NCAA trying to enforce this. This is Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti and Brett Yormark and Jim Phillips and Val Ackerman at the Big East. The conference commissioners are setting this up. So are people going to try to cheat? Yeah, of course they will. But if somebody gets caught, you can expect a serious hammer to come down, because now we're not talking about cheating stupid NCAA rules. We are talking about salary cap circumvention. And that's a whole nother concept. The other thing I will say is that there's this grand assumption that this will not hold up under legal challenges because it's a cap on player compensation as opposed to letting the market set it. That is definitely a very big question, but let's keep in mind that this is a certified legal settlement that went through a court system that was certified by Judge Claudia Wilkin, who ruled against the NCAA in the O'Bannon case, and basically let it be clear early on in the House case that she believed the NCAA was in violation of antitrust. It doesn't strike me as credulous that Judge Wilkin would certify a case settlement that is illegal, that violates antitrust. Now, are people going to file lawsuits and challenge it? Of course. It's a great time to be a lawyer. But people saying, oh, well, you can't put, well, salary caps are done all the time in the pro leagues. The difference is they have a union negotiated collective bargaining agreement. You don't have that in college, but this is kind of a de facto CBA. So I think it's got a better chance to hold up than some other people think. But, I'm obviously not a lawyer, so we'll have to let the lawyers fight it out, as lawyers tend to do.
Yeah, time will tell. A guy who went the other way, you mentioned players going back to school because of NIL. A guy that stayed in the draft that could have probably made more money in NIL was R.J. Lewis, St. John's, who of course was benched at the end of their loss to Arkansas, and there's certainly some bad blood there. Entered the transfer portal, decided to stay in the draft. Why do you think he decided to stay in the draft and not go back to school? If not St. John's, somewhere else would have paid him probably a lot of money.
Yeah, there are a lot of factors that go into these decisions. If it was only about how much money is he going to make next year, it's an easy choice. Go back to college. He probably would have gotten it at St. John's. Now, the season did not end well. You mentioned 3 for 17 against Arkansas, and Pitino benched him the last few minutes. So that was certainly a concern, but he could have gone somewhere else and gotten a big paycheck. I think the main two reasons are, first of all, from a financial perspective, you don't make as much money in year one, but you get your clock started sooner because the the rookie salary cap is locked in. So you're limited in what you can make as a rookie, even if you're Cooper Flagg. The big money comes in your second contract. So the sooner you get that started, the sooner you get to your second contract. So they talk about starting your clock early. But there's a more basic reason why kids do this is that they don't want to be in college. College is not for everybody. They want to be pro basketball players, and they think, hey, even if I go undrafted or if I'm a second round pick, I get a two-way deal. I spend time in the G League, or I got to go over to Europe. Like, that's just the life that I want to live, as opposed to being on a college campus and going to class and taking tests and writing papers and doing all that. So a lot of it comes down to just who are you and what do you want? I think he's a borderline draftable player. He did not play well at the combine. I think he hurt himself for sure in the 5-on-5 games at the combine. But to each his own. And if this is the path that he wants to choose, there are certainly plenty of examples that you can point to of players who chose this path and it ended up working out really well for him.
All this, of course, trickles down to youth sports and the summer circuit, which is in full tilt in July as coaches can evaluate in person various players. Rick Pitino famously during the season said on his Vice show, we're not recruiting any high school players. With players transferring and getting these NIL deals, what does this mean for high school players now, and what do they have to do to get these offers?
Yeah, so someone like Rick Pitino talked about not recruiting high school players. He does have 2 high school players coming in next year. One is from Australia, so really only one. Taking a lot of transfers and then bringing a lot of guys back. So, the calculation has changed. I will tell you that, if you go to any of the main high school events, I was just recently at the NBA Players Association Top 100 camp in South Carolina, and there were tons of college coaches there. All the big ones were there. So this notion that they're not recruiting high school players certainly isn't true. They're certainly evaluating high school players. But I think the main thing that has changed is, for the guys who are top 25, top 50, top 75, not really a big change. They're still going to have avenues to go to the high majors. If you're a power conference coach like a Rick Pitino and you have a chance to get a high school player of that caliber, you're happy to take him. I think the big difference is, they're not so crazy about bringing in freshmen who can't play right away because they don't think, or getting a feel for, freshmen who are going to be committed to staying for a couple of years. That's hard to, weed out in the high school process. So I think what's more common, I think what these high school players are finding out is whereas a few years ago you could go to a high major program and a really established program and sit on the bench for a couple of years and maybe sort of figure that out. Those opportunities aren't there. And I think the really smart coaches, especially at the mid-major level, lean into that, because now if you're a mid-major coach, you have an opportunity to bring in a much higher caliber of high school freshmen than you did a few years ago. And instead of, complaining when the big guys come poaching and they leave, I think it's better to go to a player who's considering a Kansas, a Duke, a St. John's in North Carolina and saying, hey, instead of going to Kansas and riding the pine, come play for me for a couple of years. You'll start, you'll get better, you'll get game exposure, you have great stats. And after 2 years, I will call Bill Self and tell you, you should recruit this kid. That happened to Matt Painter. He brought in a player that the player's coach called him midway through the year and said, he's a big guy. You've done well with his players, but these types of players, I'm sure he's going to transfer at the end of the season. I'd love him to end up with you. That's a much better way to go about it than trying to resist something that you can't change anyway. So it certainly changed, but what's not changed is that the good players will always find a home and that the top schools will always eat first in terms of recruiting. So this idea that the transfer portal is killing the mid-major, I see why people are saying that. I see some indications of that, but I'm not buying it as a long-term trend because the high major schools have always had that. And also, BJ, your previous question about the lower player salaries, if that holds, I think you could see a lot less transferring last year. You're talking about college players making literally 10 to 20% projected of what they're made in this last cycle. Then I think if there are a few dollars to chase, then I think you could have fewer players in the transfer portal next spring.
Summer, of course, being a huge time for basketball and showcases and the summer circuit all over. As someone who's covered the summer circuit for a long time, and of course as a parent yourself, what would be your best advice for parents to kind of navigate this new landscape?
I just think it's important to have clear communication and clear expectations. Your son or daughter has to play in games in front of coaches to get scholarships. And if that's not going to happen, you need to know that. And it's not fair to ambush a coach and say, how come you're not playing my kid more when that coach is trying to win games? That coach should have the full freedom to play the players he or she wants to play in order to win games. But if that's going to be the situation, that coach owes it to the families to communicate that. What's unacceptable if someone says, yeah, we're going to go to this tournament and your son or daughter is going to play a lot and there are going to be a lot of coaches there. And then you get there, you've paid all this money, you've taken this time, you have a very tight window to get exposure, and you don't play. And you've been lied to and the goalposts have moved. That's unacceptable. And then I also encourage a very high level of communication with college coaches. I mean, there are restrictions in terms of official visits or how they can reach out to you, but it's perfectly legal, no matter how young your child is, to reach out to colleges and take unofficial visits and tour the campus and have those conversations and get to know, and then pick their brain on that. If you're trying to get your kid to get a soccer scholarship, maybe he or she's not good enough to play for UCLA, but these schools have camps and you can talk to them and pick their brains, because who knows, who turns out to be good. So I'm not saying don't trust anybody, but as the old expression goes, trust everybody but cut the cards. And it really starts with communication and expectations, and have everybody's cards on the table. Here's what we're looking for. Here's what you need from us. Here's what we need from you. And if we're not in alignment, no hard feelings. We got to find another way.
You can read Seth regularly on hoopshq.com. Also, it's got a very deep roster of folks, so head on over there today for all your college basketball news and information. Seth, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate you, BJ.